Right, boys, we're going to talk about John Stones because it's a story that really turned my head because there was some honesty and some candour in some of his words this week. As we know, England play Wales today. John Stones back in the England team. It's the first time he's been in the squad for a year, but pretty brutal that road back to recovery because I think he had hamstring problems, he had a real foot issue as well. He admitted, which I thought was an incredible thing for a current serving player, that he considered retiring through injury last season. Now, he said he'd had enough of being so professional and still breaking down. Back in for City, but there's an argument that he's not quite the same player he once was based on what we've seen recently. So let's start by talking about that John Stones situation, then a little bit about mental health in modern football, because Ian, I was trying to think of other players who might have done this, and Michael Owen, when his career finished, really did open up on just how badly broken his body was, and actually he was kind of signing contracts and getting through medicals when perhaps his body wasn't in a place for it. So what was your reaction when you heard John Stones talking about this?
Yeah, I think what we need to realise first and foremost is that there aren't many professional footballers out there who play regularly, free of pain. They're all, and you ask them and they'll tell you, they're all, to a degree, got something going on, simply because of the nature of the game and the workload and the number of games that they play. There's always a niggle, there's always an ache and a pain. It's just the way that it is. And I do think that chronic injury, and I mean proper injury, players who just can't get fit, players who miss weeks and months of seasons and then get fit and then it happens again. I think that is probably the greatest strain for any professional footballer. It's the greatest professional curse for any professional footballer, because you can say what you like about them, how much they earn, their lifestyle. Fundamentally, they all want to play. They all want to play. Danny Mills famously once said, former Man City and England fullback, famously once said he didn't really like playing football. He just liked the lifestyle of a footballer. He's in the minority of about 0.1%, I would say. Yeah. They all want to play. And when they can't, it absolutely ruins them. And John Stones has been there. So these quotes came from, before every England international, every England meet-up, they do what's called a Players' Media Day at St George's Park, and all the players go and sit down and talk to the written press and the broadcast media, etc. I wasn't there on Monday, but I often am. And this was the context in which Stones kind of unburdened himself. What do we know about John Stones? Marvellous player,
great player.
A real nuts and bolts defender when he came through at Barnsley and then Everton, and then of course got his big move to City. And then we know what happened at City. You know, Pep got hold of him and turned him into the John Stones that we know now, which is kind of French. You know, it's not an exaggeration, like a Franz Beckenbauer, Alan Hansen type of footballer who can play in midfield as easily as he does at the back. But he's been massively impeded by injuries and muscle injuries. Am I surprised to hear him say what he said? No, I'm not surprised, because I think a lot of players go through it, just that not many of them choose to talk about it while they're still playing.
Just to say, 11 Premier League appearances last campaign, and the quote he said, I didn't want to do it. I'd had enough of being so professional and trying to do everything right in my power to then keep breaking down and not having the answers. It was a very difficult place to be in. And I think that's the question, isn't it? It's like, I'm sure the medical staff on hand are some of the best in the world, but have you started to see, or have you noticed any kind of mental health professionals working with clubs? It's like, there's a lot of talk of sports psychologists, but it doesn't really seem to be about mental health. It's more about the aspects of winning and competing, isn't it, Ian?
Yeah, I mean, look, mental health and kind of mental training. Because when we say mental health, we immediately think about problems, and football clubs are becoming much better at spotting issues, dealing with issues, helping players. But when I say mental training, I'm also talking about the type of mental support that you get to enable you to be a better athlete and to enable you to perform at a better level. And without a doubt, all of that would have been available to John Stones. Somebody said to me last season when City were kind of falling off a cliff, and somebody said to me, it was an agent actually, said that he'd been to speak to somebody at City, and there were 12 players that they were prepared to let go during the summer. Not all of them, because I wouldn't have had anybody left, but there was a group of 12 that they would listen to, and Stones was on the list. And I remember saying to somebody around City, said, blimey, I'm told Stones is on this list. they're like, well, yeah, but he's never fit. It's John Stones. It's John Stones. We know what John Stones is, but he's never ever fit. So, firstly, I'm delighted that he's that he's playing. Secondly, to your point, Gordon, very briefly, I was at did a thing with Brentford Football Club on Tuesday in London. They take the mental health of their players very, very seriously, and they work closely with a psychologist by the name of Michael Caulfield, who people may well have heard of. He's worked with Gareth Southgate. He's worked at quite a lot of clubs around the country, but he's now Brentford's psychologist, and he has it's a very, very simple concept at Brentford. It's called Michael's, and I've written a piece about this. It'll appear on Mail Online on Friday, I think. It's called Michael's Bench, and that's what it is. It's a bench, and it's a bench round the corner of a building at the Brentford training ground, and Michael sits on it to talk to players. And the concept is that if you just want to talk, if you're worried about your form, or you're worried about something with your family, or you're worried about your health or whatever, or you're worried about the fact you can't get in the team, you don't want to talk to somebody with a club badge on. You don't want to tell the manager your worries, because he might think, might not want to pick him. You've got Michael's bench, and Michael's there 3 or 4 days a week, and he said there's not a single player in that squad who at some point hasn't gone to sit on that bench with him, just to have a conversation. And when I met Michael on Tuesday, he brought the Brentford player Fabio Carvalho with him, former Liverpool player, now at Brentford, Portuguese lad, lovely lad. And he said he's used it, and he's used it endlessly. He said, because I know that I can just sit there and just talk. Whatever's worrying me, whatever's on my mind, I can just talk to Michael about it. And Michael refers to himself as a dustbin. He says, I'm a dustbin for all the players' problems, because once we're in my dustbin, the lid will never get taken off that dustbin. In other words, no one, the first team manager will never know, teammates will never know, the chairman will never know, the supporters will never know. But if it helps the player, then we're all good.
Yeah, Mark, what about you? I mean, the levels of abuse that referees get, you're probably up there with estate agents, lawyers, parking attendants, maybe dentists. It's an unpopular profession, because you get the blame for everything, right? So what mechanisms were there in place for you to deal with that kind of pressure?
At first, when I first got on the Premier League as a referee in 2004, there was zero. That was never talked about. We didn't really, at that point, get subject to a lot of abuse, because the abuse would only be to your face, because newspapers didn't give you any abuse. Yes, they would write about your performance, positively or negatively, but they never talked about you as a person. It's only now, over the last years, where social media has become such a huge topic, where people can have the right to say whatever they want via the social media platforms, and the abuse that you can take regarding your performances. You could
handle being screamed at in the stadium. You could deal with that. Yeah,
inside the stadium, yes, but when it gets outside of the stadium, that's when it becomes really, really difficult. When your family get abused, I remember the story when I had to tell me postman to stop delivering me mail with just my name on. They think they were doing me a favour by just Mark Clattenburg with no address. And Royal Mail think, yeah, I know where he lives. I'll drop that packaging into him. And it was just lots of abuse. And you just, that was the levels, mobile phones, everything now. And I know PG and Well are doing a lot of work behind, they've got the sports psychologists. But it's interesting what Ian said. A lot of the sports psychologists is actually for the on-the-field stuff. They don't look at the off-the-field stuff, what a person goes through and how the abuse can affect. It used to affect me a lot. And people would say, well, you're not refereeing very well. Why? And you're like a player, sometimes you form dips. And it doesn't matter how hard you try and referee, how hard you try and run the following game. You miss a penalty again and you're thinking, what's going wrong? And the abuse you would take.
How did it affect you, Mark?
I hated, like, for example, I would go home and I wouldn't speak. I wouldn't speak on a Sunday. So if I refereed on a Saturday and I'd had an indifferent performance, or I knew I could have refereed the game or certain decisions better, I would be a nightmare on a Sunday. I wouldn't speak. I wouldn't be a nice person. And then on a Monday, I would switch again and then I would prepare for the next game. So it was like riding a bike and then falling off and getting back on it again. But everybody says, and it doesn't matter what you are as a human being, you say, well, I'm not going to look at social media, but you're a human being and you want to look at it. You want to find one positive. You want to find somebody to say, actually, you had a good game, but you don't. And then you read the abuse. And like, for example, even me just doing this podcast, the abuse I take for just doing a podcast, for having a speaking part or to express my feelings or express what I think, nobody wants that anymore. I don't think a person outside wants to hear somebody else's opinion. And that's a sad where we are. And as human beings, and I get where John Stones is coming from, when you're in dark moments, it's like, how do you get out of it? You feel that the world's against you. And, you know, it's probably my saving grace was the people around us. My family, my friends were the ones that could spot how I was going quiet. I was distancing myself. I wouldn't answer my mobile phone. I wouldn't get out of bed. And they got us back into a normal place again. But then it was a revolving circle. The following week, the next week. It was only at the end of the season where you could actually have that window of opportunity before pre-season again, where you had that release. Yeah. And that was going through the season, you just went through the season the best you could.
And this is that's really, really interesting insight. And this is one of the reasons why I do think, I've said it before, that there's too much analysis of referees' performance now, which is why I think that things like the Howard Webb Sky programme that he does with Michael Owen, for example, which is all driven by this desire to have transparency, etc., doesn't help referees. It doesn't help because what it does is the type of torture that you're describing that may follow an indifferent performance is just being drawn out by this endless scrutiny of decisions. Yeah. And that's why I think, one of the many reasons why I think once a game is done, once a refereeing performance is done, you just put it to bed and you move on to the next one.
But it's strange, Ian, because even if I look back 10 years ago, I remember refereeing and you would give your best performance, of course you did. Yeah, there may be decisions that were subjective. Some people would say, yes, it is a penalty. Some would say it's not. And that's where it did end then.
Yeah.
But because, it's not just the media that's brought this, it's just society's changed it. Nobody wants to listen to somebody else's opinion.